Anya, Jeffrey Xiong looking impressive.
That was a great start. And you mentioned this. He wins the first game. Incredible opening preparation. Wesley's 𝙬𝙬𝙬 is not easy to crack like that. And yet it seemed like he was suffering basically from the time that they are out of the gates. And I think one of the things to understand about Jeffrey is that he is incredibly versatile. He's very good at opening preparation in general. So we already see him playing. Well, I guess Wesley played D4, and in the first game he played E4, but I can almost guarantee you that Jeffrey is probably going to play several different openings, and he knows all of them really, really well. I think that bodes well for his chances in this match.
Yes, and Jeffrey playing this position from the black side where white gets the big center. We were talking about this in a previous game. Black has the queen side advantage, 2-on-1. So in end games, those outside pawns can be great, but for the time being, it looks to me like something's gone wrong out of Black's opening. I mean, I don't like the look of this, but maybe this is some kind of theory where Black eventually equalizes despite the initial position looking great for white. You have the control of the C file.
You have control of the C file. Yeah, knight C6, rook FC1. The knight might have to drop back to E7. Can Jeffrey get away with rook AC8? I mean, that's very scary. White has queen A6. Okay, he goes knight E7. Yeah, definitely Black is worse. Even here, queen A6 looks perfectly fine.
Yeah, you're stopping rook C8. What are Black's pieces doing? Yeah, he plays queen A6. The knight on F3 covers D4. The knight on E7 dominated by the E4 pawn here. So white's pieces are all in great shape. Black's pieces haven't really moved, at least not anywhere advanced. So this is looking amazing for Wesley. Rook C7, very tempting.
Right, you can create some luft on the king side if you want. You can play G3 or H3. I mean, he loves these types of advantages too, where there's no risk and it's just a massive positional squeeze.
Maybe there's queen F4 here. The rook can't take E7 because the rook on C1's hanging. You can't play G3 because the knight on F3 is hanging. The E4 pawn's under attack. And he plays it. I just feel like Black desperately needs some kind of counterplay. I'm terrible at just sitting in positions like that where maybe the best move is like king H7 or something random.
Right.
But I can't do that. I need to get active, and queen F4 was the one way I saw to do so.
No, I think that's a great move. It's a practical move, and Wesley, you could see the subtle head shake there. He doesn't like the fact that he allowed it. Now, obviously, you can't take the knight because C1 hangs. E4, E4 is not hanging at this very moment because then white would take the knight. But given one more tempo, knight G6, Black is going to start creating concrete threats here. Knight G6, even here, looks interesting because in the event of a trade, the F file opens and Black's pre-positioned on that file.
Yeah, although the downside, of course, is in the long run, you'll have a worse pawn structure and an isolated e-pawn, which can get under fire. But you're right that the rook is perfectly situated on F8, along with the queen on F4, to make knight G6 justified. What other moves come to mind here? Maybe a rook to D8? Although is knight D3 a follow-up that you need to be scared about? Because knight D3 hits the queen and defends that rook, while this knight on E7 is hanging.
That and maybe G3 is an annoying idea. So Jeffrey decides on knight G6.
Okay.
I imagine that he has to trade.
And I was thinking trade and queen back to E2, but then Black goes rook D8 and D4 is under attack. F2,
right?
E4,
rook F7.
Rook D8 comes there. It is. D4 is under attack. And if you play either rook to C4, you could still play rook takes D4.
I feel like there was just an earthquake in Wesley's part of the world.
Oh, I mean, this is amazing. The queen on F4 is just perfectly placed.
How did he do that? It all started with queen F4. I think you called it, Robert. There was just a sense in which when you make one of those active moves, it's so easy to kind of lose control of the game. And I think it's obviously way too early to talk about Black, totally equalizing here, but it seems like the momentum in this particular game is on Black's side. But G3 is a nice move. It kicks the queen away. Obviously, A7 is hanging, and that might let the other rook into C7, which is never a pleasant prospect to deal with for Black here.
Yes, I mean, Wesley's position is still dominant. I did not like the way the opening went for Jeffrey. Wesley handled it perfectly. And yeah, well, it's kind of crazy. We're just going, oh, the position's looking better for Black. G3's playing like, oh, maybe not so fast. Looks really good for white. Still these weaknesses that Black has to deal with across the board. And as you mentioned, a second rook lining up in the 7th rank would just end the game. So
Oh, look at this line. Rook c7, queen d1 check, and then king g2. Well, of course, white can take on d1 and win, but I just think it's funny to illustrate that this is a classic mating pattern that white could use to his advantage and try to distract black's queen.
Right. The king gets squeezed in by its own rook. So it's sort of a funny little smother type checkmate. And that's why Jeffrey went king h8 and he pre-moved queen takes g7.
Yeah, but queen b2 and a white is winning here. Too
Should
many
be.
pawns.
Should definitely be winning. But I've seen many positions like this go from winning to equal in a matter of a few moves because the rooks are so powerful when they line up on a pawn. The issue, I would say, Danya, is if this pawn were on f7, black would have great chances to hold. The pawn on e6, it's isolated. And if that pawn is lost, then white has pawns just marching up the board, pawn f4, pawn e5, and so on. But I would say Jeffrey has some chances, even if objectively, I'm totally with you that white should be winning this game.
I agree. And you made an important point about that pawn potentially being on f7. Black has the idea of doubling on the a file. And if he does that, then, that's why the queen is often inferior to the two rooks, because you literally cannot defend that a pawn with a single piece. But with black's e6 pawn being as weak as it is, this is what you're saying. Black has to distract and assign part of his resources to the defense of that pawn. And white can kind of tie his queen to it and then start pushing the a pawn. But no, definitely good technique is still required here for Wesley.
Oh, and that's a good defensive posture
there
for
we go.
Jeffrey.
There's that doubling. That's step one.
It is.
Double rooks and then king f7, and you might start talking about drawing chances here.
For sure. That's why pawn structure is so important, right? Like if this pawn on h6 were over on f7, then black is like almost better. But because the pawns are split like this, white, of course, pressing for a win. And we saw a game of the final round of the Grand Swiss between David Howell and Vincent Keimer, where it was a queen and a pawn versus two rooks. Here it's queen and two pawns, and black's pawn structure is much worse in this game than in that one. So I think that Wesley can still press on. If Jeffrey can play king f7, he's threatening rook takes a4.
Why not? Why not king f7 here? I guess queen b7 check, and then queen can reposition to e7 if the king drops back to g8, and that could be nasty. So Jeffrey first going rook a7, preventing the queen from infiltrating the 7th rank. And on the next move, king f7 is a very serious threat, Robert. I think you kind of called it. I didn't expect this to be as close as it was. Now queen f3 check and e5 maybe?
e5. Okay, it was queen c3
back
first.
To c3. Okay, king f7.
There could be queen h8 and then e5. And that way your queen gets the f6 square.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
That is very nice. And once the queen gets to f6, black loses basically all of his pawns.
Yeah, I think that's the knockout here.
Jeffrey definitely overlooked that. And if you go rook a8, then queen h7 check, and again e5 comes. No, this is incredibly nasty.
And very nicely done by Wesley, because we were just saying how all of a sudden Jeffrey on the verge of stabilizing, not so fast. e5 I think is a good practical try.
Back to h8 maybe.
And then rook e4 is definitely not hanging because there's a check, and so you can't take on e4.
I guess, yeah, but I just don't see this happening. Now rook a6 defending the g pawn. Wesley doesn't really have to rush. I think he can eventually just go f4 and f5 and slice off that h pawn, and then he's going to have 3 pawns against 2 rooks, which is totally winning.
Yeah, f5 is a very important move to have. And is rook e7 possible to try to like induce e5 to make f5 harder to play?
But I'll still go f5.
Yeah.
Rook e7. And if you take on e4, I'll go queen h7 check.
So you're a big old bully. That's why.
That's exactly right.
And if king here, now the queen can take. And if the king goes back, the pawn takes. So that would be
important game for Wesley to win, because, you don't want, as I said, it's too early to talk about momentum in the first 2 games, but if Jeffrey had held this one, that might have hurt Wesley's confidence, because he's usually incredibly good at converting these kinds of positions. And for Jeffrey, he's probably not going to repeat this particular opening.
And Jeffrey really wants rook a7 to a2 and then rook h1 checkmate.
What a bully he is. Wait, rook a2?
Yeah, this actually...
He's got to try it.
You have to play this.
Queen h7 check. And if king f8, queen h6 check?
Yes.
Gives the check instead and back. Oh, this threatens.
He wants to go rook a2
something.
with check, but I don't think it works. So the king.
But
can go up
even
to
there,
F3.
the king can drop to f3. Yeah. Okay, his king embarking on one last pilgrimage.
He wants his king to go to E3.
I like it.
It's a
You
good
know,
effort.
these positions, this can turn around. You know, sometimes you're just giving these checks, you think everything wins, and all of a sudden the king somehow finds shelter.
It only works though, Danya, if the time was reversed, right? If Wesley had 6 seconds left. But this is
King f3 and rook a1. Yeah, but now you're gonna just go like queen.
At some point, you may be able to take a rook with your queen and then push your pawns, but not yet.
That's exactly what I was trying to get done. Wesley's a little annoyed here, I think, that he's not winning this
queen
in smoother fashion, but
queen e3 and then put your queen
and
on
even queen
d2.
d2. Yeah, exactly.
Just
And
queen
let's
d5
not
check.
forget White has a gazillion pass pawns there. Okay, 2 to be exact, but
No, gazillion was the technical term for it. You were correct the first
right,
time.
right. I'm sorry. I keep using. They warned me not to use jargon, but can't help it.
So Wesley, he's thinking
Wesley
here.
is, yeah.
I like that they're going to trade off victories. That's the vibe I'm getting from this match in the early going. They're really going for it. Does the king get out? Yes, it goes e3,
king
d4.
e3, king d4, and the zigzag, the dreaded zigzag. And now there's got to be a fork somewhere.
This rook has to be lost. Queen a4 check,
Queen,
and then queen a1 check. And
very nice, very nice. Even king f4 was winning.